The New Orleans Conference, the world's greatest investment event.
I remember coming here in 2011, and a lot of people who've been investing in gold remember what happened in 2011. That's when the price of gold went all the way up to $1,900 an ounce. And the price of silver went up to about $50 an ounce. And probably not many people who were here then probably believed that they'd be coming to the New Orleans Conference in 2019 and gold would be down at around $1,500 and silver would be, it's not even $20 an ounce, right? Because the reason that the price of gold went up so much in 2011 was because early on, right, after we had the financial crisis, we had the collapse of the real estate market, the mortgage market. We had all the big bailouts. We had TARP. The deficits exploded up to $1 trillion a year, which at the time was big. I mean, they're bigger now, but back then that was pretty big. And the Fed started doing quantitative easing. A lot of people were rightly concerned. I mean, maybe not the majority, but certainly a sizable minority was worried that maybe this was not a good thing. That maybe monetizing all this debt, printing all this money, taking interest rates down to zero, maybe this wasn't going to end well, right? And so people started to buy gold. They started to sell the dollar, right? And of course, everything that Ben Bernanke did in the aftermath of the crisis was a mistake, right? Because all the Fed did is repeat the mistakes that caused the crisis in the first place, right? The Fed lights the fire, and then everybody wants to give them credit for putting it out. Now, I don't want to get into why or how the Fed caused the financial crisis and the bubble that preceded it, because if you don't know that already, they're screening the movie at 8:30 tonight, the Bubble movie, which is a movie that really goes over. It features me and a lot of the other speakers that are here, and it shows a lot of the footage when we were going out there predicting all this before it all happened. So go and check out that movie tonight, and to know, if you don't know, how the Federal Reserve caused the crisis in '08. But what they did after that whole thing blew up is they just did more of the same, right? Because we had a debt bubble, we had too much debt thanks to the Fed. And instead of allowing the economy to restructure, to have a new viable foundation upon which to build a lasting economic recovery, we just inflated a bigger bubble. And so when a lot of us who understood the problems and the mistakes that the Fed made, and we saw them making even bigger mistakes because they inflated the housing bubble by cutting rates to 1%. But after it popped, they brought them all the way down to zero. And it wasn't just bringing them down to zero and leaving them there for 8 years or whatever, 7, 8 years. But they did 3 rounds of quantitative easing. The Fed's balance sheet exploded as the government started monetizing all this debt. And of course, it didn't want to call it monetizing debt, so it called it quantitative easing. But initially, there was concern, rightfully, that this was going to end in a monetary disaster, that printing money was inflation, you were debasing the currency, and so people naturally who understood this went into gold, right? And they sold dollars. But then around 2015, everybody became convinced that what the Fed did worked, that people like Peter Schiff, we were all wrong, right? Paul Krugman was taking victory laps. I told you so. You see, printing money doesn't cause inflation. It's nothing wrong with that. And because everybody looked around after the Fed had done QE1 and they had slashed interest rates, and everything seemed okay. And then you had Ben Bernanke claiming that he saved the economy. In fact, he didn't just claim it. He was going around the country giving speeches. They had him on the cover of magazines. He saved the country. He wrote a book, right? The Courage to Act, or whatever it was, called. I mean, it should have been The Coward's Way Out. And I used to joke, if I used to see that book And if it was in the nonfiction section, I would want to move it over to the fiction section where the book belonged. But he was, he was dubbed as the savior. And so everybody all of a sudden thought everything was great. And so the price of gold just imploded. I don't know if you remember, it was a couple of days, it dropped $200 or $300, just all of a sudden, right? And gold went into this long correction, right? Bear market, whatever you want to call it. Gold and silver both went down. The dollar went up because everybody was convinced that the monetary policy had worked and it was all going to end well.